The rumble of diesel engines jolted me awake outside my dwelling. Initially, I mistook the sound for a refuse collection vehicle on an unusually early route. However, the vibrations that began to agitate the window panes signaled something was amiss. Clad in well-worn boots and a t-shirt still bearing the faded emblem of the 82nd Airborne Division, I ventured onto my porch. That's when I observed them. 3 substantial industrial vehicles, their fresh paint emblazoned with the Homeowners Association's insignia, crudely affixed like a brand. They proceeded past the cul-de-sac, turned onto my gravel access, and charged directly onto my grounds. No prior notification, no telephone correspondence, no electronic mail, and not a single posted notice on the community bulletin board. Only heavy treads obliterating the margin of my lawn, dismantling the stone edging I had painstakingly laid by hand following my military retirement. My residence was not among the meticulously maintained properties on Camberley Lane, characterized by uniform shutters and pre-approved shrubbery. My dwelling occupied a tract at the periphery of the HOA's jurisdiction, a 2-acre expanse. My late spouse and I had acquired this parcel before the residential development had expanded to this extent. I had erected the structure myself alongside a modest greenhouse and a well-kept vegetable patch where I cultivated heritage tomatoes, sweet corn, and lavender. The land held profound significance for me. It represented the sole constant in a world of change, and now individuals in high-visibility vests were desecrating it as if it held no value. I advanced towards the vehicles, gesticulating wildly, my heart pounding. A man sporting mirrored spectacles and a clipboard acknowledged me with a perfunctory nod. "Hold on there, sir," he stated. "We're merely clearing the way for the utility extension." "What utility extension?" I retorted, my voice sharp. "You're on my property." He barely lifted his gaze. "Please consult your HOA. We have the necessary approvals." "Approvals for what?" My fist tightened as I surveyed the machinery. They were unloading concrete conduits, likely for storm drainage, and coils of dark piping. Shortly thereafter, another truck arrived, dragging a broad grader that gouged deep furrows into the yielding soil. The turf, my irrigation system, the rose bushes delineating the walkway's edge, all were indiscriminately ravaged as if they were worthless weeds. I retreated indoors, retrieved the HOA directory, and dialed the number for the board's president. She answered on the second ring. "Karen McTavish speaking." "It's Daniel Cole. Your vehicles are on my land." A brief silence ensued, during which I could almost detect her subtle amusement. "Actually, Mr. Cole, that strip along your western border is designated as Community Easement Zone. It was incorporated during last year's development expansion. You should have received the updated plot schematic." "I never received anything," I stated. "And this is not an easement. It's part of my deeded acreage." She emitted a light chuckle, the kind that conveyed an ingrained sense of entitlement. "Kindly check your mailbox, Mr. Cole. All residents were duly notified." My hands began to tremble, not from apprehension, but from sheer indignation. I had endured the suffocating sands of Fallujah. I had navigated infernos and withstood barrages of ordnance, and I was damned if I would permit a petty neighborhood autocrat like Karen McTavish to trample my property without a struggle. "You're tearing up my irrigation system. My gardens are ruined." "A temporary inconvenience for long-term enhancement," she replied with nonchalant ease. "The HOA board voted to install a new drainage conduit and pedestrian walkway. It will elevate property values across the board." "I did not vote on that." "Well, you were not present at the meeting, as the notice of the meeting was, as usual, posted behind the locked clubhouse doors. I terminated the call without further exchange. My blood felt as if it were simmering. I retrieved my property deed, the original copy, yellowed with age but legally binding, and stormed out to confront the workers once more. By then the grader had carved a 10-foot wide trench across the edge of my vegetable patch. My sweet corn was gone. The patch of basil, near which my daughter used to play when she was little, had been crushed beneath the weight of truck tires. I brandished the document aloft like a banner. "This land is mine," I bellowed. "You are trespassing." The clipboard-carrying individual glanced at me as if I were an insignificant insect buzzing in his ear. "Sir, with all due respect, We are simply following the work order. You are welcome to address this with your board." The machinery continued its relentless advance. I stood there, utterly helpless, as a backhoe commenced excavating near the foundation of my greenhouse. That structure had served as my sanctuary, particularly since Rachel's passing. I watched as the first pane of glass fractured and fell. Something within me shattered, not in a manner that prompted tears or vocal anguish. No, this was a profound alteration, cold, precise. My years of military service flooded back in a single surge. The briefings, the maps, the strategic discussions held deep within bunkers while explosions reverberated outside. If they wished to engage in conflict, very well, but they would soon learn. I never initiated hostilities, but I invariably saw them through to their conclusion. The subsequent morning, I occupied my vehicle parked outside the county recorder's office, a thermal flask of black coffee in one hand and a replica of my property deed in the other. I had managed a mere 2 hours of sleep, most of it spent in a lawn chair beneath the broken framework of my greenhouse, listening to the creaking of metal and the soft dripping of ruptured irrigation hoses. One certainty remained. If I allowed this encroachment to proceed unchecked, it would only intensify. Karen McTavish was not merely asserting her authority, she was testing me, pushing the boundaries, quite literally, to ascertain if I would capitulate. The fundamental issue was that she had no conception of the force she was provoking. Within the recorder's office, I presented my original deed, the officially stamped plat map, and all supporting documentation that I had meticulously maintained for over 15 years. The clerk, a woman of quiet demeanor named Beth, raised an eyebrow. "Who is claiming this is community easement now?" she inquired. "They can claim the sky is green," I replied. "It doesn't make it so." She gave a subdued chuckle and accessed the most recent GIS map overlay. We cross-referenced the documents. My property, Lot 47B, had not been legally reclassified. There was no record of any easement filed against the land. No zoning amendments. Nothing. "This remains private property, Mr. Cole," Beth confirmed, turning the screen towards me. "You own up to that split oak tree. Everything west of it is yours." I exhaled slowly and deeply. It was not yet vindication, but it was the confirmation I required to shift to an offensive posture. Upon returning home, the construction vehicles were still present, though fewer in number, yet their presence was palpable. They had widened the trench, erected stakes adorned with fluorescent flags, and unfurled tarps. However, I observed a new addition. 2 HOA volunteers standing nearby, each holding a clipboard and sporting smug lanyards that lent them an air of officialdom. I approached one of them directly, a man in his 60s with thinning hair and sunglasses disproportionately large for his face. "You are trespassing," I stated plainly. He looked up. "Sir, I assure you, this development has received board approval." "Then show me the permit." He blinked, momentarily disoriented. "It's handled through the city planner's office. The HOA coordinates." I interrupted him. "You are on private property, not HOA land. Mine. And there is no recorded easement. I have just verified this with the county." He shifted his weight abruptly, his confidence visibly diminished. "That is something you will need to discuss with Ms. McTavish," he said. I stepped closer. "I have. And now I am giving you one warning. Remove your equipment from my property." He remained immobile, yet he was not the sort to stand his ground resolutely, more of a go-between caught in a situation beyond his purview. That afternoon, I drafted a certified cease and desist letter and personally delivered it to the HOA office. I anticipated their dismissal of it. That was precisely the objective. I needed them to transgress one more line on the official record. At 7:15 in the evening, Karen McTavish initiated a call. I allowed it to ring through. "Mr. Cole," she began, her voice syrupy, but with an underlying chill. "We have received your letter. However, I'm afraid you are mistaken regarding the status of your property." "Mistaken," I responded, already initiating the call recording. "I've just returned from the county office. My land has not been reclassified." "That depends on your interpretation of the master plan overlay," she replied smoothly. "Per Article 4, Section 2 of the HOA expansion addendum, Your western boundary falls within the designated community access corridor. That document was never approved by the city, nor was it put to a vote by all members. It was passed by quorum, she stated, as if that concluded the discussion. I paused. Karen McTavish, you do realize you cannot supersede county property lines with an HOA meeting. A pregnant silence followed. This is not merely dubious, I continued. It is unlawful. I suggest you proceed with extreme caution, Mr. Cole. Filing false claims or interfering with construction could lead to legal repercussions. There it was. The threat. I am well aware of the law, I said, my voice steady, and I know precisely what I am permitted to construct on my property. You have left me no alternative. She hesitated. Construct what? I offered no reply, simply ending the call. I gazed out the window at my ravaged yard. The corn was gone. The basil, the roses, the small white fence, all shredded. Yet the soil remained mine. I could feel it, much like you sense a scar on your body, regardless of its depth. My fingers tapped against the desk. I opened a locked cabinet that I had not accessed in years. Inside lay my old military drafting equipment, a T-square, a compass, and rolled blueprints from my time designing base layouts under mortar fire in Kandahar. If Karen McTavish wished to engage in games of property demarcation, I would remind her precisely with whom she was dealing. That night, I did not sleep. I remained awake, sketching, not out of malice, but with absolute clarity. I knew my land better than anyone. I understood the soil's load-bearing capacity, the water flow patterns, the precise curves of the trenches. I did not require permits because I was not constructing a building that mandated them. I was constructing a message. By midnight, my design was complete, a memorial wall emulating the perimeter of a forward operating base, utilizing salvaged barriers and industrial fencing, all constructed within legal specifications. No concrete foundation, no permanent anchors, merely steel posts, motion-activated lighting, and a subtle deterrent for anyone who dared to disregard boundary lines again. It would be erected by dawn. And when they beheld it, they would not simply halt, they would freeze. With the advent of daylight, the familiar sound of grinding engines returned. I was already awake, having managed no more than 10 minutes of sleep, just enough to refocus my resolve. Outside, the HOA's vehicles began to arrive. Not a single one this time, but a procession, moving with even greater deliberation than the previous day. The morning sun glinted off the chrome grills of their vehicles, transforming them into gleaming war machines poised for conquest. Except this time, I was prepared. I stood at the edge of my porch, arms crossed, observing as two dump trucks advanced towards the far corner of my land, resembling termites intent on consuming decaying wood. One of them rolled directly over the remnants of my lavender beds, crushing the stalks into the muddy earth as if they were mere weeds. Another veered off the excavated trench and sank halfway into a patch of soft ground I had deliberately watered the preceding night. A miscalculation they would undoubtedly regret once the mire engulfed the axle. And just like that, the sound that had once filled me with dismay, metal scraping against dirt, wheels raking the earth, transformed into something else entirely. Fuel. I traversed the perimeter of what remained of my garden. The irrigation lines were in tatters. Hoses lay severed, dangling like ruptured veins from the gaping wounds in the earth. A dozen sprinkler heads, each meticulously positioned, were scattered in the dirt like broken teeth. I stooped and picked up a fragment of PVC pipe, snapped cleanly and smeared with oil from the vehicle treads. That pipe had demanded a week of my labor to excavate and install, back when my back could still endure long days under the sun. My wife had assisted me in burying it, her hands encased in gloves far too large for her, her face alight with a smile, despite the sweat beading on her brow. Now it lay twisted and useless, a memory desecrated by the arrogance of the HOA. I should have felt numb. Instead, I experienced an intense, laser-like focus. At 7:42 in the morning, I received a call from a member of the HOA's legal committee. Her name was Cheryl, and she sounded unnerved. "Mr. Cole," she began, "I wish to apologize for the misunderstanding. Karen McTavish may have been overly zealous. We did not anticipate how deeply personal this land is for you." I offered no response. "We believe a compromise is achievable," she continued. "If you would permit the project to proceed, the HOA is prepared to allocate a modest landscaping grant to restore your property afterward." A bribe, I thought, or a gesture of goodwill? "No, no," she hastily added, "just a restoration agreement." "You intend to desecrate my property, and now you propose to replace it with generic turf and a few discount shrubs?" She sighed audibly. "You are escalating this situation." "No," I stated firmly. "You escalated it the moment your vehicles crossed onto my land. I am merely attempting to avert legal entanglements." "Oh, there will be complications," I said calmly. "But not for me." I terminated the call before she could reply. By late morning, the remaining heavy equipment had arrived. A bulldozer, another backhoe, and even a concrete mixer. Evidently, they were preparing for a full-scale construction effort, as if my objections and actions held no consequence. That was when it occurred. They struck the primary irrigation line. I was positioned at the side of the house, securing the steel poles for my project, when I heard the hiss. It was not a brief expulsion, but a prolonged, high-pressure scream of water escaping under immense pressure. Then came the crash. A geyser erupted into the air, followed by the backhoe lurching backward and nearly overturning as the ground beneath it gave way. The HOA workers shouted, frantically attempting to shut off a valve that no longer existed, having been buried years prior beneath 2 feet of stone and soil. Water gushed out like arterial blood, transforming the excavation into a swamp within mere minutes. One of the trucks attempted to reverse, but the saturated earth clutched its wheels as if it were quicksand. I could not suppress a laugh. By midday, my garden had devolved into a construction wasteland. 3 vehicles were immobilized. A damaged hydraulic arm lay discarded, and half a mile of pipe was ruined. Karen McTavish, the HOA president, appeared personally, marching onto the scene in designer boots clearly unsuited for the mud. Her expression was one of unbridled fury. Even her sunglasses could not conceal the agitated twitch in her jaw. "Mr. Cole," she barked, advancing towards me. I did not flinch. "Still trespassing. This is obstruction, and you are tampering with active development." "I am safeguarding private property. My right. My land." "This land was voted into the easement corridor." "No, you claimed it was. You never filed it. You never recorded it, and now you have caused over $10,000 in damages." She slowly removed her sunglasses, as if this gesture were intended to intimidate me. "You believe this juvenile outburst of yours will deter us?" she hissed. I tilted my head towards the pile of stuck machinery, the inundated excavation, and the workers now engaged in phone calls to towing services. "Does it appear as though you're making progress?" For a fleeting moment, I detected something in her demeanor, not just anger, but a palpable fear. The kind of fear that arises when one realizes their perceived absolute control is in fact illusory. Then, with practiced precision, she masked it. "You will be hearing from our legal team," she declared. "I eagerly anticipate it," I responded. "As will mine." She stormed off, her heels sinking precariously in the mud. That afternoon I worked with a speed I had not exhibited in years. The steel framework of the wall took shape in sections I had prefabricated over the preceding 2 nights. I mounted motion-sensing lights, strung them along the upper edges, and bolted down the recycled steel panels that would form the structure's facade. But the crowning achievement, the centerpiece, was the flagpole, standing 10 feet tall. At its apex, waving with a pride I had not felt in years, was the American flag, the very one I had carried in my rucksack through 2 overseas tours. I had kept it meticulously folded in my trunk, awaiting a moment of genuine significance. Now it flew, not in the context of conflict, but as a testament to peace, not as a threat, but as a resolute declaration. This land is not yours to seize. And by sunrise tomorrow, it would be impossible to ignore. The following morning, emails began to flood my inbox before the sun had even risen. The first was from the HOA's legal liaison, an individual named Darlene, whom I had never so much as exchanged a greeting with in the past decade. Her tone was frigidly polite, imbued with a corporate veneer that barely concealed the veiled threat beneath. "Mr. Cole," it read, "this constitutes formal notice that your recent construction may be in violation of the Harmony Hills HOA development covenants. You are hereby requested to submit architectural review forms and cease all further building until approval is granted." I did not even pause. My reply was a single PDF attachment. It contained my property deed, the county map clearly delineating my boundaries, and an email exchange with a city zoning officer named Mitch Taylor. Mitch Taylor and I had served together 20 years prior. He now held a mid-level zoning management position at City Hall. Upon my reaching out, he had unhesitatingly confirmed my position. "Dan," his email read, "you're in the clear. That parcel is privately held and not subject to HOA building restrictions under city code. As long as it is non-permanent and under 15 feet, they have no jurisdiction." I possessed legal clarity, I had structural legitimacy, and most importantly, I had a veteran friend wielding the authority of the city seal to corroborate my case. However, the HOA was not prepared to concede defeat so readily. By 9 o'clock in the morning, I had received a second notice. This time, it was a physical envelope affixed to my front door like a scarlet letter. Notice of non-compliance. Violation. Unauthorized structure construction date immediately. Penalty $2,500. Fine per day of non-compliance. Resolution required immediate dismantling of structure. They had even included a photograph of my wall, printed and annotated with a red marker. The flag was encircled with a handwritten note stating, "Flagpole exceeds allowed visibility height." I chuckled. Visibility height? That was not even a recognized term. This was not about adherence to rules. It was about absolute control. Karen McTavish did not fear the structure itself. She feared the symbol it had become. The emails, the vehicles, the walls, none of it held the significance of the truth she could not erase. I had made a visible public stand, and the neighborhood was observing. Later that day, while reinforcing the base of the steel panels with ground stakes, I noticed two neighbors standing near the edge of their lawns, engaged in hushed conversation. Mrs. Patel, who had not spoken to me since her son's graduation 3 years prior, waved and approached. "I saw what they did to your garden," she said gently. "It's wrong." I looked up, sweat trickling down my brow. "They're pretending it's progress." She nodded. "Karen McTavish bulldozed the park swing set 2 years ago to build that HOA shed. Never asked anyone." "I remember," I said. She hesitated. "My husband is a paralegal. He could look over anything you plan to file. No charge." I blinked. "Thank you." Then came the genuine surprise. Mr. Hillman from across the cul-de-sac, a retired insurance agent and a lifelong adherent to rules, brought over a tray of lemonade and remarked, "They've gone too far." Meanwhile, Karen McTavish escalated her efforts. On the second day following the wall's completion, I received a registered letter from a local law firm. The envelope was substantial, excessively so. I brought it inside and opened it at the kitchen table, a knife in hand. Within lay a cease and desist letter, proposed fines, and a pre-litigation warning. They cited HOA bylaws, articles I'd never signed, sections irrelevant to non-HOA parcels, and a fabricated clause concerning neighborhood harmony standards. It was utterly preposterous. They intended to sue me. But the most significant detail was this paragraph. "Your structure constitutes an intentional obstruction of a pre-approved community improvement project. If not removed within 72 hours, the HOA reserves the right to remove the obstruction by contracted means and charge the cost to your account." They were threatening demolition. I paced the living room, much like I would in pre-mission briefings, meticulously constructing potential scenarios. I understood the implications of their threat. Karen McTavish was planning to dispatch a crew to destroy what I had erected, potentially with police escorts, should she succeed in convincing someone at City Code Enforcement that I was either unstable or combative. I could not afford to delay. I retrieved my laptop and composed my own letter, 3 pages in length, replete with citations of civil codes, county zoning exemptions, property boundary laws, and a comprehensive explanation of the Veteran Memorial Clause that Mitch Taylor had reminded me of, but I did not stop there. I provided images showcasing the devastated garden, captured by my security cameras with timestamps, along with audio recordings of my conversation with Karen McTavish and a notarized statement from Mitch Taylor verifying the land's legal status. Subsequently, I disseminated this information not only to the Homeowners Association, but also to the municipal attorney, the local zoning authorities, the county supervisor's office, and, for good measure, a journalist from the Tribune who had recently reported on HOA malfeasance in a neighboring town. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the email was dispatched bearing the subject line, HOA overreach on private property, evidence and witnesses attached. By 6 o'clock that evening, a response arrived from the Tribune reporter inquiring, "Can we talk?" At 7 o'clock, a city zoning inspector left me a voicemail stating, "Mr. Cole, we are initiating an investigation. Please refrain from dismantling anything." I stepped outside as dusk began to settle. The wall now stood resolute, complete with newly affixed floodlights and a bronze dedication plaque at its base, honoring those who stood their ground when conformity seemed easier. That night, I experienced my first restful sleep in days. I understood that the true conflict lay ahead, but for the first time, I wasn't facing it alone. The wall was merely the initial step. By the time the city zoning inspector confirmed that my property was exempt from the HOA's construction oversight, I was already immersed in blueprints. My intention wasn't to construct further, but rather to anticipate the inevitable escalation. Karen McTavish, I knew, would intensify her efforts. It was her pattern. She would persist until I either succumbed to costly litigation or was silenced through forceful measures. However, what she failed to comprehend, what she never bothered to investigate, was my profession prior to retirement. I served as a combat engineer in the United States Army, constructing forward operating bases under hostile fire, stabilizing precarious terrain with nothing more than specialized soil reinforcement and sheer tenacity. I deployed temporary water systems in volatile regions with zero room for error. Now I possessed tranquility, ample time, and a renewed purpose. I retrieved the storage container from beneath my workbench, a receptacle I hadn't accessed in years, and unrolled my seasoned engineering toolkit. The leather straps groaned like aging joints. Within lay all that I required: my surveying equipment, precise metric rulers, high-quality pencils, and the very clipboard I had carried through challenging environments. I cleared my dining table and commenced sketching. Initially, it was an automatic process, ingrained muscle memory guiding my hand. Then it evolved into something deeply personal. I wasn't merely designing defensive structures. I was crafting a declaration, a living, breathing statement to anyone who believed they could cow individuals into silence. The strategy comprised 3 distinct elements. Firstly, the existing wall, now fortified with steel mesh at its foundation to thwart any accidental collapse during potential cleanup operations. Secondly, a symbolic centerpiece. A raised platform positioned the property's central axis, constructed from salvaged timber and crowned with a 5-foot bronze eagle acquired from an auction of veterans' memorial artifacts. I planned to position it to directly face the HOA clubhouse, its unwavering gaze and outstretched wings serving as a constant sentinel. Thirdly, the message itself. 30 solar-powered uplights would encircle the platform in a perfect ring, each bearing an engraved word of profound significance: integrity, freedom, boundaries, consent, justice, truth, service, home. To some, it would resemble a memorial. To others, it would stand as a bastion of defiance. I dedicated 48 consecutive hours to the project. My neighbors began to take notice. Mr. Hillman arrived with his vintage leveling instrument, offering assistance with precise alignment. A local high school student inquired if he could deploy his drone for aerial photography. I readily agreed, and within hours, the images he posted on Instagram were being shared across a popular community Facebook group. By the 3rd day, individuals I had never met were dropping off supplies, offering words of encouragement such as, "Keep going." The HOA, predictably, registered these developments, and Karen McTavish found herself losing control. That afternoon, two of her compliance officers, essentially retired individuals in company-branded polos clutching clipboards, attempted to enter my property to conduct an inspection for alleged violations. I intercepted them at the entrance. "This is private property," I stated. "You require a warrant." They retreated, but not before one of them surreptitiously snapped photographs, muttering, "This isn't over." I welcomed the warning. By sundown, the eagle was installed. It required the combined effort of 6 individuals to position the weathered yet magnificent sculpture, its wingspan nearly 6 feet across. I secured it to the foundation and stepped back as the final light illuminated, casting a golden halo upon its copper plumage. Behind it, my flag continued to fly. That evening, I hosted my first gathering in years. It wasn't a boisterous affair, but rather a simple assembly with folding chairs, coffee, and individuals weary of living in fear. We sat in a semicircle, observing the gentle pulse of the lights in the darkness. Some shared their thoughts, while others remained silent. Yet one thing was unequivocally clear. Karen McTavish had misjudged the situation. This was no longer solely my personal struggle. It had become a collective one. I anticipated retaliation. The HOA was unaccustomed to being disregarded, let alone actively opposed. However, my construction efforts were far from complete. In fact, I was just beginning. The remainder of the week was dedicated to excavation. Employing established army trenching techniques, I rerouted my existing irrigation conduits to circumvent the damaged sections. I established surveillance at all 4 corners of my property, linking the feeds to a secure off-site server. I even installed motion detectors at the base of the wall, which provided real-time alerts to my mobile device. By the 6th day, the HOA had issued another infraction, this time alleging a violation of the neighborhood's aesthetic uniformity principles. I had the notice printed, laminated, and mounted on a stake adjacent to the eagle. Beneath it, I added a secondary plaque. "This is the appearance of fear of freedom." The following day, a Channel 6 news van arrived and parked across the street. The reporter, a young woman named Sophie Nguyen, requested permission to film the ongoing installations and conduct an interview. I paused, reluctant to elevate this to a matter of personal ego. However, I recalled a piece of advice from a former colleague. If the conflict reaches your doorstep, you cannot remain silent. You must present yourself, stand firm, and maintain your composure. Consequently, I agreed. That evening, my story was featured on the news broadcast. 5 minutes of footage documented the ravaged garden, the newly erected wall, the flag, the eagle, and myself standing with folded arms before the monument, articulating the profound significance of reclaimed land beyond mere acreage. The HOA's digital mailbox must have been inundated. Karen McTavish remained unseen for 3 days. However, upon her reappearance, I was prepared. She presented legal documents, a summons, and the threat of civil litigation, her eyes betraying a deeper emotion than mere anger, disbelief. How could someone possibly refuse to yield? With a practiced smile, she handed me the envelope. "You believe you have triumphed," she declared. I examined the envelope. My endeavor has not yet commenced. The sun had not yet fully crested the horizon when I stepped back to survey my creation. It was no longer just a wall. It was not solely a tribute or an act of protest. It had become a fortress, not of conventional materials and weaponry, but of unwavering resolve. A space that unequivocally stated, "This is the boundary, and you have crossed it." Steel panels gleamed like polished silver in the nascent dawn light, firmly anchored to the earth like an impenetrable shield. The bronze eagle caught the first morning rays, its wings appearing as though poised for immediate liftoff, ready to soar directly over the HOA clubhouse. The wall gracefully curved along the western perimeter of my property in a deliberate arc, an intentional design choice intended to confront, not retreat. Above it all, the flag remained aloft, a symbol of pride and unyielding spirit. At the base of the eagle's perch, I had planted 2 new rows of lavender, a poignant tribute to what had been destroyed and a tangible reminder of my capacity to rebuild. And in the profound stillness of that early morning, I sensed a fundamental shift. This was no longer exclusively my battle. By the time I had prepared my morning coffee and tightened the final bolt, vehicles had begun to slow their passage. Some came to a complete stop. Neighbors emerged from their homes, smartphones in hand, capturing videos and still photographs. One individual posted a clip to Facebook with the accompanying caption, "Veteran erects fortress after HOA demolishes garden." Within the span of an hour, the post garnered 40,000 views. At precisely 9:13 in the morning, a black Escalade pulled to a halt. Karen McTavish emerged, her heels impractical for the uneven terrain. Her fingernails were painted a deep crimson, and her hair was pulled back into a severe bun that suggested an utter absence of spontaneity. Flanking her were two men in impeccably tailored blazers, undoubtedly her legal representatives. They positioned themselves at the edge of my property, maintaining a respectful distance to avoid trespassing. I waited. She offered no greeting. Instead, she fixed her gaze upon the wall as if it were an alien construct, an anomaly within her meticulously ordered existence. She then took a single deliberate step forward and declared, her voice laced with evident disdain, "This is a spectacle." I responded with a nod. "That is precisely the intention. You are rendering the HOA's authority a mockery." "No," I countered. "You are achieving that consequence entirely on your own." Her lips tightened into a thin line. One of her legal counsel stepped forward, unfurling a document. "Mr. Cole, pursuant to Harmony Hills HOA Section 11B, we are formally serving you notice that your construction violates the neighborhood covenant pertaining to unapproved structures and visually incongruous elements. You are hereby afforded 48 hours to dismantle the offending installation, or legal action will be pursued." I accepted the document and perused it at a leisurely pace. Subsequently, I retrieved a folder I had brought with me. "Here is my response," I stated, presenting my own documentation. "Signed letters from the City Zoning Board, a temporary designation of cultural significance under the Veterans Property Act, and the official boundary certification from the County Clerk's Office." All items were notarized. The lawyer's gaze faltered upon a cursory examination. Karen McTavish snatched it from his grasp, her eyes scanning rapidly, her lips moving silently. "This is not valid," she asserted sharply. "It is officially filed," I countered, "with the city, the county, and the Office of Veteran Affairs. You would need to override all three entities to have it removed. I wish you the best of luck with that endeavor." She offered no verbal reply. Her attention shifted towards the increasingly substantial gathering of neighbors observing from their respective lawns. Some were recording the scene. Others simply observed with quiet smiles, arms folded. A few individuals had even brought lawn chairs. Karen McTavish was evidently losing her audience. Her attorney murmured something in her ear. She turned back to me, her voice considerably lower. "And now you believe this makes you a hero? You think anyone actually supports this charade?" Behind me, a single clap echoed, then another. A wave of applause rippled across the street. It was not a thunderous ovation, but rather a steady, insistent sound, reminiscent of the nascent stages of a significant movement. Karen McTavish's face flushed a deep red. "I will not be portrayed as a villain," she hissed. I remained impassive. "Then cease behaving like one." She spun around abruptly and departed, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement, the two attorneys trailing in her wake. The instant she was out of sight, a cheer erupted. I had not solicited it, nor did I require it, but I must admit it felt gratifying. For the first time in years, I was not isolated. That afternoon, a news drone hovered overhead. The segment broadcast by Channel 6 had achieved viral status, attracting the attention of national media outlets. My phone remained perpetually active. Reporters, legal professionals, and former Army comrades with whom I had not communicated in years all reached out, expressing a uniform sentiment. "You are doing what we all wish we had the courage to do." Yet, I did not feel courageous. I felt weary, indignant, and resolute. The following day, Karen McTavish attempted a counteroffensive by publishing a public statement on the HOA's official website. It was replete with legalistic jargon and vague accusations regarding community disruption and non-compliant property owners. She conspicuously omitted any direct mention of my name. Such an omission was unnecessary. The community understood the implication. Instead, a coalition of neighbors initiated a petition titled Protect Lot 47B, Halt HOA Overreach. They amassed 300 signatures within a mere 48 hours. Even the local VFW post commander personally visited my property, offering a firm handshake and assurances of support. Let us know if you require assistance with securing it. We have your back. Nevertheless, I was certain that Karen McTavish had not abandoned her campaign. She was not inclined towards surrender. She was meticulously searching for a legal vulnerability, a singular technicality, an oversight, or a missed signature that would allow her to reclaim control. However, on this occasion, I was several steps ahead. I was not merely constructing a physical fortification, I was assembling a bulwark of legal precedent, public visibility, and widespread community support, a structure that no bulldozer could possibly demolish. I gazed once more at the eagle, perched regally atop the platform, and whispered to myself, "Let her come." Because this time, my response would not be solely defensive. It would involve a strategic counterattack. It commenced with a solitary aerial perspective. The high school student, Jackson, I believe that was his name, had deployed his drone just after sunrise, capturing sweeping footage of my property from above. His recording encompassed the elegant curve of the steel wall, the bold flag snapping vigorously in the wind, and the bronze eagle positioned atop the platform, appearing as if it were sculpted from defiance itself over the past century. The accompanying caption he posted read, "And this man built a fortress after the HOA destroyed his land. Respect." By midday, the video had garnered 100,000 views. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 media vans were parked along the curb across the street, and by 5:30, a palpable tremor began to affect Karen McTavish's composure. She attempted to maintain an outward appearance of indifference, as though the situation were not rapidly spiraling beyond her control. However, I observed her. She stood behind the blinds of the HOA clubhouse, peering through the slats like a besieged general, monitoring the assault on her own dominion. I did not indulge in gloating, nor did I permit myself even a hint of a smile. I continued sanding the final component of the tribute bench I had constructed beneath the eagle, a designated space for neighbors to convene, reflect, and remember that certain aspects of life are not subject to committee governance. A reporter from Channel 4, camera in hand, approached me from across the street. "Mr. Cole," she inquired, "do you have a few moments?" I nodded and wiped my hands on a well-worn shop towel. My attire was unremarkable, consisting of jeans and a faded army engineer shirt, but that was precisely the point. My construction was not motivated by a desire for public recognition, but rather by an intrinsic need to protect what was rightfully mine. As her cameraman filmed, she posed questions regarding the property, the HOA's destructive actions, the wall's construction, and the symbolic significance of the eagle. I responded with careful deliberation and unwavering honesty, referencing the deed, pertinent zoning regulations, and official county filings. I ensured every utterance was measured, controlled, and unshakable. This endeavor is not driven by vengeance, I explained. It is fundamentally about establishing boundaries, both literal and personal. They transgressed mine, and I have reasserted them. Her eyes brightened. That is a powerful statement. Precisely, I affirmed. It is essential that they comprehend it. As she expressed her gratitude and began to turn away, I noticed Karen McTavish approaching from the direction of the clubhouse. Her gait was rapid and decisive, as if she were attempting to catch a train that had already departed the station. Her facial expression was tense, her lipstick applied with almost excessive precision. She marched directly towards the camera crew, her heels crunching audibly on the gravel. "Excuse me," she announced. "I am Karen McTavish, president of the Harmony Hills HOA. I wish to issue a clarification. This property is currently undergoing a review for its easement status, and Mr. Cole's actions may be subject to legal ramifications." The reporter blinked in surprise. "So, the property is not regulated by the HOA. It's a complex situation." Karen McTavish responded with an irritated snap. The board has been actively engaged in developing a comprehensive community improvement initiative. However, the county records indicate that the land is privately owned. Is that correct? The reporter queried. Karen McTavish hesitated. The ensuing silence was palpable. The camera continued to record. Well, we believe that to be the case, but the official records indicate it falls outside HOA jurisdiction. Karen McTavish's lips curled into a sneer. We are actively investigating this matter. The cameraman shifted his focus, panning from me to her and back again. She registered this shift. Naturally, everyone present did. Karen McTavish's face turned crimson. This individual is undermining neighborhood cohesion, she declared, her voice escalating in volume. He is erecting militaristic structures. He is intimidating residents. This assertion proved to be the tipping point. Mr. Hillman, from across the cul-de-sac, stepped forward. No one in this area feels intimidated, he stated with clarity. Mrs. Patel offered a corroborating nod. He extended an invitation for all of us to visit. We feel demonstrably safer now than we did previously. A younger mother, holding her toddler, added her voice. Karen McTavish, you didn't even inform us about the arrival of the construction vehicles. He's merely protecting what is rightfully his. Karen McTavish's jaw tightened perceptibly. She turned her gaze towards the camera, realizing she was now perceived as an outsider within her own neighborhood, and attempted to backtrack. I am merely acting in the best interests of the community. Then you should listen to the community, I interjected, my tone measured. She turned sharply and stormed away, the camera crew dutifully capturing her retreat, much like a vanquished monarch departing a ruined court. That evening, the news segment aired during prime time. The on-screen headline proclaimed, "Veterans stand firm, HOA faces backlash after demolishing garden." The segment was brief, lasting only 5 minutes, but its brevity enhanced its impact. The visual narrative superseded any need for extensive commentary. The images depicted my ravaged land, the imposing fortress-like wall, the resolute flag, the proud eagle, Karen McTavish's visible distress, and the neighbors rallying in my defense. The following morning, the story achieved national prominence. I awoke to a deluge of calls from Good Morning America, an email from a podcast dedicated to veterans' rights, and even a preliminary inquiry from a documentary filmmaker interested in exploring instances of HOA overreach across the nation. I declined most of these invitations. My objective in constructing the fortress was not to achieve notoriety, but to safeguard something sacred from eradication. However, with each reposting, sharing, and discussion of the story, a subtle erosion of Karen McTavish's authority was occurring, a development I sensed she keenly felt. That afternoon, a moving truck appeared outside the residence of one of the HOA board members. By sunset, another member had submitted their resignation via an email broadcast laden with phrases such as unprecedented public scrutiny, stressful circumstances, and misrepresentation by leadership. Karen McTavish was absent from the monthly HOA meeting. In her stead, she dispatched a representative, a man in a suit, who attempted to initiate the proceedings. However, a significant portion of the chairs remained unoccupied. Those that were filled contained residents now holding copies of the HOA bylaws. One individual held aloft my laminated violation notice and declared, "If this is the current standard of our enforcement, perhaps it is time to consider a vote of no confidence in the current board." A hush fell over the room. The proxy stammered, "Such a motion would necessitate a special session. We shall schedule one," someone from the audience interjected, "immediately following our visit to Mr. Cole's memorial tomorrow." The meeting was adjourned without further deliberation. Karen McTavish was losing her campaign, not due to my direct confrontation, but rather because I had exposed her true nature. The wall I had erected was more than mere construction. It served as a reflective surface, and the image it displayed was one she could not tolerate. The correspondence Karen McTavish had eagerly awaited finally arrived. However, its contents were far from her desired outcome. A zoning inspector from the city, a gentleman named Thomas R. Byrne, appeared at my doorstep bearing a clipboard and a pleasant demeanor. "Mr. Cole," he stated, adjusting his spectacles, "I wish to deliver this personally, not out of obligation, but because many of us downtown observe the news coverage." He presented me with an envelope bearing the city's official seal. Within was a formal declaration from the Municipal Zoning Authority, unequivocally affirming that my property, Lot 47B, resided entirely beyond the jurisdictional purview of the Harmony Hills HOA. Furthermore, it stipulated that my constructed elements, the wall, the platform, the eagle, and even the lighting system, had been officially recognized as compliant under the provisions of the Veteran Recognition and Memorial Clause, a relatively obscure yet legally enforceable section of the city's municipal code, specifically Section 44.7. In essence, I possessed the complete legal right to erect my constructions, rendering Karen McTavish's objections entirely baseless. I meticulously scanned the document multiple times, savoring each word. I was not naive. Official papers do not always deter a persistent adversary. However, this document was underpinned by the full weight of the law. I inquired of Thomas Rayburn if he could provide a second signed copy. "Certainly," he replied. "Would you like me to leave one at the HOA office as well?" I responded with a smile. "That would be most appreciated." Less than 30 minutes later, the HOA's electronic inboxes were inundated with a mass-forwarded version of the document, with all relevant parties CC'd, including every resident, all pertinent city departments, and, for good measure, the HOA's own legal counsel. Karen McTavish offered no response. She was incapable of doing so. She lacked any counter permits, zoning overrides, or easement filings. Her assertions that my wall violated community harmony standards dissolved the moment a pertinent question was raised regarding whose definition of harmony was being applied. And still, my actions were not concluded. I initiated a formal liability claim against the HOA with the city's Public Nuisance Division, citing property damage supported by photographic and video evidence, documented emotional distress verified by my physician, and the unauthorized encroachment upon private land substantiated by GPS-tagged drone footage. I dispatched the claim via certified mail and included a CC to the HOA's insurance provider. It was at this juncture that a significant shift began to occur. If one wishes to observe an HOA descend into panic, threatening their insurance premiums is a remarkably effective catalyst. Within 72 hours, a notice appeared prominently displayed on the HOA bulletin board. Emergency board session, convened, closed to public. Karen McTavish likely envisioned this as her chance to regain control, to twist the narrative, and to rally the remaining board members into a defensive posture, blaming media interference, poor communication, or some vague misunderstanding with the city's zoning department. However, what she failed to anticipate, what was entirely beyond her foresight, was that she was no longer facing a solitary opponent. A coalition of residents, including Mr. Hillman, Mrs. Patel, and even the mother of the young drone operator, had established a volunteer committee dedicated to ensuring transparency within the Homeowners Association. They had submitted a Freedom of Information Act request seeking access to all internal HOA correspondence pertaining to my property. What they unearthed was utterly damning. They discovered emails exchanged between Karen McTavish and a private developer discussing an ambitious expansion project that would have necessitated access across my land. In one such exchange, Karen McTavish stated, "He's a quiet guy. He won't fight this. Just act fast." And most distressingly, they found a draft agreement outlining financial kickbacks, contingent upon the successful conversion of the land into shared community access. They brought this evidence to me, their hands trembling. "You need to see this," Mr. Hillman conveyed. I didn't say much. I just nodded. Following this revelation, I made another crucial call, not to an attorney or a news outlet, but to an individual I had only spoken with once since this ordeal commenced, Mitch Taylor, my former Army comrade and now the city's zoning manager. He answered on the second ring. "I knew I'd hear from you again," he remarked with a chuckle. I recounted the entire saga to him, the emails, the FOIA documentation, the damage inflicted, the manipulation, the attempted dispossession. He fell silent for a considerable moment before responding, "You want this halted?" "I want her held accountable," I declared. "Then it's time we escalate this beyond the city's purview." 2 days later, the W State Attorney General's office dispatched a formal letter to the HOA requesting all development records, transcripts of board meetings, and voting protocols related to land reclassification. The inevitable cascade of consequences began to unfold rapidly. Karen McTavish attempted a final, desperate maneuver, filing a lawsuit in small claims court alleging defamation, obstruction, and acts of community sabotage. The legal papers were delivered by a process server who offered an apology as he handed them over. "Man, I've seen some wild cases, but this," he admitted, "this feels personal." I presented the lawsuit to the same attorney who had assisted me with the initial liability claim. After a single reading, he looked up and stated, "She's bluffing. And this gambit is about to spectacularly backfire because Karen McTavish either failed to grasp or adamantly refused to acknowledge that I erected the wall not out of spite, but out of necessity." When someone bulldozes your property and expects to silence you through intimidation, you don't simply repair the damage, you construct something that commands attention. That evening, I received a voicemail from an unexpected source. A former HOA president who had served years prior to Karen McTavish assuming leadership. Her voice was slow and weary. "Mr. Cole," she began, "I simply want you to know that we never intended for things to reach this point. We cautioned her about her power plays, about disregarding established boundaries. You are doing what none of us were able to accomplish. Thank you." I saved the message and sat on the bench beneath the eagle, gazing out at the structure into which I had poured my frustration, my discipline, and my sense of loss. My thoughts turned to my wife. I envisioned her tending to the garden as she once did, pointing out the tomatoes and laughing at my perpetual tendency to overplant. I thought of the rose bush she used to water, the way she would kneel in the soil, unconcerned by the dirt. I couldn't restore what was gone, but I could safeguard what remained, and I could ensure that no one would ever attempt to seize it again. It commenced subtly. No sirens, no grand announcements, simply two unmarked vehicles parked discreetly outside the HOA clubhouse one Thursday morning. Two men and a woman, clad in dark trousers and windbreakers, alighted from the cars, clipped badges to their attire, and entered the building as if they were its rightful owners. Within the span of an hour, they emerged carrying boxes, laptops, flash drives, and paper files. Karen McTavish was conspicuously absent, not present to witness the proceedings. I, however, was. I stood behind my fence, savoring a cup of black coffee, observing the scene from the shaded sanctuary of the eagle's perch. There was no exultation, no smug satisfaction, merely a nod. The kind of acknowledgement you offer when justice finally begins to mobilize. The city had acted with remarkable alacrity. Bolstered by the FOIA disclosures, my neighbors had uncovered the undeclared communications between Karen McTavish and a local developer, along with the unapproved resolutions and clandestine negotiations. The city attorney's office initiated a comprehensive audit of the HOA board, investigating not merely misconduct, but outright fraud. 2 days later, subpoenas were issued. Karen McTavish attempted to spin the situation, posting a rambling official statement on the HOA's website, attributing the events to media sensationalism and the malicious intent of a few fringe neighborhood members. However, her narrative found no traction. Not after the news reports surfaced displaying her signature on pre-development documents for a community logistics center slated for the very location where my garden once thrived. She had harbored plans to unlawfully convert my property into a paved thoroughfare for HOA maintenance vehicles. The project had already been cost estimated, permits drafted, and a developer secured, all prior to any public notification. Now it was all unraveling. By the close of that week, the HOA office doors were locked. A notice from the city building inspector, a stark scarlet flag, declared the office closed pending investigation and forbade the removal of any records. The repercussions, however, were only just beginning. Two board members tendered their resignations within 48 hours, one citing ethical qualms, the other admitting to having blindly followed the leadership. A third individual, reputedly relocated out of town, vanishing from public view. Karen McTavish, despite the mounting evidence, refused to step down. Instead, she doubled down, engaging in door-to-door campaigning to propagate her version of the truth, accusing me of fomenting division and warning of impending anarchy within the community. Yet with each door she knocked upon, it seemed to close a little more decisively than the last. Some remained firmly shut. When she approached my gate, I was already outside, diligently cleaning the eagle's wings. She remained silent initially, simply standing there, clutching a file folder as if it were her last vestige of authority. "You've poisoned this place," she finally declared, her voice strained. I met her gaze, truly observing her. She appeared weary, not just physically, she continued, her voice losing its sharp edge, her posture visibly slumping under the weight of being exposed for who she truly was. "I didn't poison anything," I responded calmly. "You just didn't anticipate anyone pushing back." She opened the folder and brandished it as if delivering a final blow. "I'm filing a civil restraining order against you for harassment, public intimidation, and destruction of HOA property." I regarded her, slowly and silently. Then I reached into my pocket, retrieved my phone, and pressed a button. A faint beep confirmed that the recording was active. "Say that again?" I inquired. She froze, her expression contorting. My bluff had been called, and I was prepared. I possessed recordings, security camera footage, drone imagery, audio transcripts, a digital archive capable of burying her deeper than any legal maneuver. She believed she had the fortitude to proceed. Her mouth opened, then closed. Without another word, she turned and walked away. The subsequent day, the neighborhood convened a special public session. It was not officially sanctioned by the HOA, as the office remained under investigation, but this did not deter the residents from gathering on the clubhouse lawn, holding aloft signs, and reciting from printed bylaws. I remained on the periphery, out of the spotlight, as Mr. Hillman took the microphone. "We have tolerated this abuse of power for far too long," he stated, "and thanks to one man's stand, we are finally seeing it for what it truly is." He gestured in my direction. I raised a hand, a gesture of a reluctant acknowledgement. Mrs. Patel followed. "This is no longer about gardens or walls," she proclaimed. "It's about who represents us, who listens, and who serves." A resolution was proposed on the spot, a motion to recall Karen McTavish as HOA president. It passed with an overwhelming margin of 82%. Karen McTavish was not seen for several days. However, the true victory transcended the recall or even the investigation. It was the fundamental shift in the neighborhood's dynamic. People who had previously never conversed began engaging in conversations over hedges. Fences were painted collaboratively. Children rode their bicycles across yards that had once served as silent battlegrounds of lawn care competition. The pervasive tension that had gripped the community, the apprehension surrounding HOA notices, the paranoia regarding mailbox paint colors and garden gnomes began to dissipate. A bench was installed in front of my wall, followed by a community book exchange, and subsequently a second flagpole erected by a teenager whose father had served in Afghanistan. My property had transformed from a site of conflict into a place of profound significance. And I, in turn, began to find my breath again. The garden was gone, but new life was taking root. Neighbors offered their assistance in rebuilding. I informed them that I intended to leave it as it was for a period, a living testament, not to what had been lost, but to what had been reclaimed. The soil still bore the scars, but now they recounted a narrative, one that even Karen McTavish could not obliterate. The atmosphere had changed. It wasn't solely the collapse of the HOA board or the discreet removal of Karen McTavish's name from the official neighborhood directory. It wasn't the cessation of the rumbling trucks traversing my property or the newfound reluctance of anyone to cross my boundary line. It was something more profound, the sound of neighbors engaging in laughter once more. The sight of children drawing with chalk on sidewalks that once felt like surveillance zones. It was the palpable sense of belonging, not as a privilege granted by a committee, but as something we had collectively reclaimed. 3 months had elapsed since the investigation concluded. The city formally closed the case with a censure against the HOA board for exceeding its authority and engaging in procedural misconduct. The liability claim I had filed was settled discreetly, sufficient to compensate for the damage incurred and to enable the installation of proper drainage and a modest irrigation system for the land that had been ravaged. Karen McTavish sold her residence. The moving van arrived on a Tuesday just before dawn. She offered no farewells, nor were any expected. The street observed her departure, akin to a storm receding after a prolonged and tumultuous season, and no one offered a wave. The wall remained standing. I had contemplated its removal on a couple of occasions. However, each time I passed by it, ran my fingers along its cool steel, or gazed up at the eagle, I realized it was no longer exclusively mine. It had become a symbol for everyone who had felt steamrolled, disregarded, intimidated, or silenced by an individual who mistook authority for inherent right. The bench beneath it had evolved into a tranquil gathering spot. People frequented it with their morning coffee. On Saturdays, veterans convened there, sharing stories that compelled the rest of us to listen more intently and laugh more heartily. Even the HOA, having undergone restructuring and a period of introspection, began conducting its meetings in the open, no longer within the confines of the locked clubhouse, but in the park pavilion where anyone could approach and voice their perspective. One day, a child, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, approached me as I was planting new lavender at the base of the wall. He looked at the eagle, then back at me. "Did you build that?" he inquired. I nodded. "Yeah." He appeared impressed. "It looks strong." "It is," I affirmed. "Why did you make it?" I smiled. "Because someone tried to take something that didn't belong to them, and I had to remind them it wasn't theirs to take." He contemplated this for a moment, then nodded as if it made perfect sense, and ran off to rejoin his friends. It was such a simple question, yet it encompassed everything. That summer, the local Veterans of Foreign Wars Post requested permission to hold a small memorial service on the property. A modest gathering of 30 individuals, a flag-raising ceremony, and a few brief remarks. I agreed without hesitation. The ceremony was profoundly moving. A chaplain delivered an address, names were read aloud, and as the final note of taps faded into the surrounding trees, a gust of wind lifted the flag as if it too had something to impart. Afterward, people approached me, some I barely knew, simply to shake my hand. A woman from 2 streets away remarked, "I didn't even know your name until all this transpired. Now I recount your story to my grandchildren." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I merely nodded and expressed my gratitude, for ultimately it wasn't about the wall, the garden, or even the lawsuit. It was about the pivotal moment when you cease to be afraid, when you establish a boundary not out of animosity, but out of love for your home, your peace, your memories, your inherent right to exist without being dictated to by those who confuse power with purpose. That evening, I sat outside, observing the lights gradually illuminating one by one across the platform. The lavender swayed gently in the breeze, new roots taking hold beneath the soil, and I thought of Rachel. She would have found this all rather amusing, I suspect. Shaken her head, teased me for my obstinance, and then helped me plant more basil, as I invariably forgot to rotate the garden beds. She would have been proud, not because I engaged in a fight, but because I stood for something, for someone, for myself. They attempted to bulldoze me, to erase a parcel of land, assuming no one would offer resistance, but I did. And in doing so, I didn't just erect a wall. I created a space where silence ended, where neighbors transformed into friends, where fear no longer dictated the rhythm of the block. And long after I'm gone, I hope they will still gather here, beneath the eagle, beside the flag, and recall the year when someone declared, "Enough." Because when you defend what is rightfully yours with truth and unwavering conviction, you don't merely win, you forge a legacy.